chat, unregulated social media of such a huge level of input, and you are allowing the racist, misogynist fans onto the network, it then allows them to send out misinformation. So I think it's, at the moment, it's just something that it does seem like the Wild West.
President Biden says trust between the US and its allies was key to the largest prison swap with Russia since the Cold War. 26 people from prisons in 7 different countries have gone home after an exchange in Turkey. The swap included the American journalist Evan Gershkovich, who came to arrive back into the US. Gershkovich said it was good to be home.
It was great to be home. I was today and see a lot of, not just Americans and Germans, but Russian prisoners, but I just spent a month in prison in UK prison where it was a whole new base for everybody outside the prison.
The Labour government has scrapped funding of £1.3 billion promised by the Conservatives for British technology projects. Ministers say the money was unfunded and never properly allocated. Levi Bellfield has been blocked from having a civil partnership by a new law banning serious criminals marrying in jail. And Gavin Stiller had previously sought legal aid to challenge the decision to stop his marriage. And Olympic organisers have ruled out a return to blanket gender testing following a row over boxer Imani Khalif. The Algerian fighter has been competing at the Olympics despite previously failing gender eligibility tests. Italy's Angela Carini pulled out of a fight with police yesterday. In the city, a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading down 33 points at 82.50. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.17. LBC weather, breezy with a band of rain moving into the north and west this afternoon. Sunny in the south and east with some clouds. Late sunshine for Northern Ireland, a high of 28 degrees. In global speed trade for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
And now West, we partnered with Team GB. So just like we help you reach your goals, we're backing the nation's top athletes to achieve theirs this summer. But what's the national team without its nation behind them? So it's that solid. Push around every corner. And last ditch lunge towards the finish line. Let's support them all the way. Whatever your goals, let's go. Tomorrow begins today with NatWest. Proud partner of Team GB.
I want to pick up really from where Keir Starmer left off yesterday. He spoke just after I had left you Hansel Swarbrick after 4 o'clock. But I thought I listened to his words on the way home at the press conference, and I thought they were incredibly powerful, very timely, and very necessary. The words that stood out to me, as well as the detail of what he said, with the reinforcements, whether it's money or forces across the country are going to get to deal with instances of rioting or unrest breaking out. That's one thing, but the phrase that leapt out at me from what Keir Starmer said yesterday, and we'll talk more about the implications of that phrase after 2, was when he said, they, the far right, have shown us who they are, and now we need to show them who we are. I thought that was a really powerful statement from the Prime Minister this week. It was akin to the conversations we were having the day before on air. I was saying, what do we do? What responsibilities do we all have to make sure that those agitators and influencers on the far right, those organised, deliberate groups on the far right, that would rally around people who aren't members of anything or actively would describe themselves as far right activists or neo-Nazis or anything like that, that they are able to be rallied around in a way that I certainly I'm trying to be. The question I was asking the other day was, what do we do as individuals? Let's return to that in a way, using Keir Starmer says as friendly examples. He says, what we are people to, they far right have shown actually bad politicalism, isn't it? It's important to find out where those are. That's not the majority of mosques in this country. The majority of mosques in this country are today Friday prayers, going about their business of worship, of prayer, of community support, of charity work, of family cohesion, community cohesion. So what I want to know is, I just want you to tell me about the life of your mosque. And also, perhaps 5 days on from those killings and the violence which followed, the subsequent violence which followed, what has it been like for you? Both before these events and since. The sense of threat. I was speaking to a Muslim friend of mine last night who has 3 children, and she feels, she's felt it before, but she's felt a renewed sense of nervousness and anxiety, particularly for her children's safety, and her own, I'm sure, at some level. Tell me about that too. But I'm really keen to showcase, essentially, the work that mosques across the country are doing. It's really important that we do that as the weekends. This is the Imam of the Southport Mosque, which was attacked on Tuesday evening, and this is him talking a day or two ago about the response from the local community.
Do you think the far-right want to hijack this town's...
Naturally, this is a beautiful town. We've lived here for 30 years, no bother at all. We love the community loves us. We don't have any issue with anybody, except maybe parking spaces and stuff like that. But and they all agree.
People have been helping clear up, prepare the wall.
That is humbling. Really was humbling. It's I mean, I've seen it bring tears to my eyes, because although I know people of Southport and I know how beautiful they are, but this was still, a moving experience to see all that.
Zahra Mohammed joins me, Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about the life of our mosques there.
Well, I think, wow, such a poignant message from the Imam from Southport Mosque, and I had the pleasure, we had him on our session, we had a community mosque briefing yesterday evening, and he came on and he just was such an inspiration to so many, particularly because of that spirit of community that we've touched on. For many of the listeners, the mosque is not just somewhere we go for prayers, but actually it's many of the elderly in our community will go for that elderly care, having a cup of tea and a biscuit. Many young people will go for classes, both educational, but also summer programs and fairs, but also many women, and like myself, will be heading off for Friday prayers too, will go for our own classes and groups, and there's so much activity happening, particularly in the summer, and we have our Visit My Mosque program, which is going to be in its 9th year this year in September. It's all about opening doors, working with local community. I visited over kind of 300 community organisations across the UK myself, and there probably wasn't a single one that either didn't have a food bank or some kind of a local relief program or project, and interfaith group, coffee morning.
Very similar, clearly very similar to churches, to temples, to synagogues. The community hub of it is what I want to get to the bottom of, because I think in a week when that particular mosque was targeted in the way that it was in Southport, I think in a way my instinct was a little bit ahead of Keir Starmer, which is to say, well, let's showcase exactly what that means to be part of a mosque and for a mosque to be in a community. Let's just showcase it and drown out this hatred and this nonsense.
Absolutely, and if we recall, particularly during COVID, mosques were vaccination centres. Thousands of people were getting vaccinated.
They were food delivery centres, weren't they? I know a friend of mine's parents were part of the mosque that they attended.
It was critical. I know ladies that dropped off food to elderly from all the different communities because people couldn't go out to eat. So they are service providers and hubs, but they're working with a wider and broader community, and that's what you saw in Southport, which is everybody came together and said, they're actually part of our community. So we don't know who these outsiders are that are coming to destroy things. And your instinct was very much right, Sheila, in that, we are part of a wonderfully diverse Britain.
And that works because all of us are working together. And this constant demonization and kind of choosing the framing around mosques isn't actually true. They're your neighbors, they're your friends. And for many of us, hundreds of thousands of Muslims will go to prayers today, and part of our prayers also for our communities to be safe. No one wants in their neighbourhood. And for many who saw the scenes in Southport and Hartlepool and Downing Street, it's just really terrifying. And
I think, we need to be realistic as well, don't we? That whilst there are organised far-right and neo-Nazi gangs, that we've clearly seen the work that they can do this week, sadly. There are also individuals in every community, including Southport, who quietly don't want Muslims where they live, or don't want black people where they live, or don't want Asian people where they live. They won't be in the larger number of the community. A bigger number of the community would outweigh them, I'm certain of it. But we have to be realistic about that as well, don't we? And counter it again, I guess, by how we live rather than by actually going after people like that.
Yeah, it's a really pertinent point. I mean, there's an ideological side to this, and there is an issue on how people view others. And what we saw was a really strong, both Islamophobic sentiment, but also anti-immigrant sentiment. That's kind of what really kicked the story off, and lots of misinformation around it. And there was some really good discussions this morning around, this connecting migrants and immigrants to criminality and all of that goes on. And you're right, that's such a minority of society, but they do exist. And not all of that is going to exist in a violent form. But I think what's really important is, as you said, dispelling the misunderstandings and the myths around what are you really afraid of? And what is this happening to your society and actually together? And
what have people, just ordinary Muslims that you come into contact with in the work that you do and just in your own community, what have they been expressing to you about nervousness, fear perhaps? Because it's a rational response to some of this, isn't it?
It's been very distressing. I think people have been really, really upset and really worried and also terrified of what they saw at Southport. The fact that this was a fake news story and Muslims are so quickly vilified to an extent that these mobs and thugs were coming out to target a mosque, and now we've heard lots across social media of more planned attacks, and they've specified which mosques they're going to go to, cities they're going to go to. It's really so coordinated, and even talks of a Russian bot that kind of encourages stories. I think for many Muslims, they're just shocked. They said, okay, if you said this was about Southport and we fact checked that it's not, what are these protests now about? You've got taking
they're about Muslims, aren't they? Yeah.
They're about Muslims. So then what's it? What about the tragedy that you tried to hijack these poor children who were killed, and you've used that now as your kind of framing. But what are you attacking this weekend? You're attacking communities, you're attacking families and children and women and our society. You saw what they did to the neighborhoods, and that seemed very patriotic at all. So there seems to be this really strong undercurrent of Islamophobic hate, anti-immigrant hate, and that's really boiling up. And I think the law and order approach isn't going to tackle that. There's got to be another approach to actually
it must tackle it, but it can't tackle it on its own. It has to be at community level.
In the immediate, we're going to need extra policing, we're going to need that security in place, and we're going to need a heavy hand. But in the wider side of it, it's that deep sense is root of the issue. Why are you constantly now feeling it?
Well, we'll hear later actually from the imam from the Quilliam Mosque in Liverpool, where a protest, quotes, is planned at the weekend. And God bless him, he's gone on social media saying, if you do come along to protest at the mosque, we'll be there with a cup of tea, a burger, cold drink. Do feel free to come in, and maybe you'll learn something, and what a bold response that is.
Absolutely. And we've had many stories like that, not in this particular last few days, but where EDL have turned up and the imam said that why don't you just come in for a cup of tea and we could talk about it, and sat for hours with them having a chat. So there is that sense of people power and community.
But it has to be done carefully and safely, doesn't it? Yeah.
Of course, unfortunately not everybody's going to want a cup of tea, and I think the police will be really critical. We've told everybody you need to work with your local police force, with your fire service, local authorities and councillors. You need to take all the precautions you need to, and just keep managing that level of threat. And even in Northern Ireland, lots of protests panned, and you know, they're actually marching through the mosque for some of these protests. So if there's big hordes and gangs of people, just be really careful, and we just hope for the best, really, and we hope that it doesn't escalate beyond what we've already seen.
Well, let's use this hour as a supportive hour, and also one where we can learn about the work of mosques in our country. Thank you very much indeed, Zara. Pleasure to talk to you. Zara Mohammed, Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. Loads of your calls coming in already, which is brilliant. It's 118.
This is LBC.
McDonald's new mix and match menu. Choose any three for just £3. Like a cheeseburger, fries and an apple pie. Or a mayo chicken, McNuggets and an apple pie. Or an apple pie, and an apple pie. To share, obviously. The mix and match menu. Any three for £3. Ends 27th of August from 11 a.m. Selected items only. Delivery uplift and fees apply. Subject to availability. Price and participation may vary.
Demand for water shoots up in the summertime. Every day there are more taps turning, more sprinklers spraying, and more sunseekers making a splash. While the weather's warmer, can you make the most of every drop? Small swaps, like having a shower instead of a bath, or using a watering can instead of a hose, can save water and could cut the cost of your water and energy bills. Search Thames Water Calculator to see how much you could save today. Thames Water. Every drop counts.
Tonight's Euro Millions jackpot is £24 million.
Oh, that calls for a dance.
Do you know the robot?
I'm a little rusty.
Oh, you've still got it?
Never lost it.
You're a machine.
Get that Euro Millions feeling tonight. Euro Millions from the National Lottery. Play on app. Estimated jackpot. Account terms, rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
So, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, I've called you in today because Charlie has been using some rather colourful language, and the dinner ladies don't really appreciate it. The word he used was...
Some conversations aren't worth the trouble. People used to think talking about your finances was one of them. But with a My Money review at Skipton Building Society, you can get advice that helps you make more sense of your money. And it's completely free. That's one less conversation you'll regret later.
I want 50 lines of, I will not teach my children bad language.
Online, over the phone, or in branch. Search Skipton Building Society to find out more.
It's our 50th birthday, and the one and only Double Big Mac is back at McDonald's. Hang on, I know the rules to this one. Make space! McDonald's 50th birthday! You're all invited! Until 3rd of September, from 11 a.m, participating restaurants only, subject to availability.
This is LBC with Sheila Fogarty. Call 0345 6060 973. Alexa, send a comment to LBC. Text 84850.
Louis has texted to say this is really refreshing, bringing Muslims on to talk about how their mosques promote positivity in society. It would be so easy to get someone on to moan about racism and just promote more division. In reality, 99% of British people all want to get along. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's certainly a bigger percentage than those who don't. This is great, says Louis. Well, I'm glad you think so, Louis. I think it's high time, certainly this week for sure. Bibi in Leicester, hi.
Hello.
What did you want to say, Bibi?
A few things. So, looking at me, you'd see a Muslim woman who practices. I wear a gown and I wear a headscarf. And I usually have children in tow. Images can be deceiving, so I'd like for your listeners to know that I was born and raised in the UK, and my father actually served in the Royal Air Force for 25 years. I actually teach English, but a lot of people, when they look at me, they wouldn't know that, of course, naturally, but I will get all sorts of ignorant comments coming my way because people don't know me, so they'll just judge me off what I look like, and they don't know that my father was serving. I grew up in the 90s and I have vivid memories of not seeing him around when I was young because he was always off abroad serving. And the irony as I've grown up to tell people that here I am actually trying to help others integrate, to learn English, to be able to go about their daily lives, and then to be told by people, by the media, by whoever, politicians or whatnot, that British Muslims don't integrate.
Or just because of what you wear,
yes.
Making 100 decisions about who you are.
Absolutely. And it's a real shame because that's a lot of people have said 99% of Muslims are not like that, and no, that's not the vast majority of us. And I actually have quite a peaceful, quite a normal life, but my neighbourhood is fantastic and I have great neighbours. But to have sort of that bigotry come our way so unnecessarily and so unprovoked, it just makes living here that little bit harder. And yes, we do fear for our children. I do fear for myself when I go out, and I have to think twice sometimes, depending on what time I'm going or where I'm going, or if I'm going to be alone, just because I don't want to face anything, untoward. So it just baffles me that people rather than having a conversation, would be so quick to judge. Sometimes I'll get, derogatory comments. Sometimes I'll get hand gestures when I'm driving or when I'm, walking in the street with a pushchair. And you think, how have we got to this?
And do
How
people
has this happened?
and is the derogatory comment more than an anti-woman comment? Because we all get that. Is it linked to your?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. You can sense it, I mean, I'm not going to label anyone, but sometimes it can be, from a white van man, sometimes it could be from a group of kids, and you just think, come on, I'm one of you. The only difference is how I choose to dress and my faith. And by and large, I am teaching and promoting more British values than you probably have or will, because I taught in British school. I taught British values. I'm teaching English. I'm not teaching another language. Here I am trying to encourage.
And you're certainly not. You're certainly not teaching hate.
Exactly. It's all about being a good citizen and being a good Muslim, and the two go very much hand in hand. It would be hypocrisy if we went against that, and we can't. So we would rather, lay low, stay quiet, try to go about our day as quietly as we can.
Like most people, just want to live a life, raise your kids, have a nice time, have a job, have a house.
Absolutely. But it's just frustrating when you think about the sacrifices my mum made when we were growing up, my father made for this country, to be labelled a few years or a few generations down the line with all that sort of, anti-Muslim rhetoric and all that hate. It's so disappointing.
Yeah, I'm just, as I'm listening to you, Bibi, I'm looking for a tweet that was sent to me. I think it was the day after, it was Tuesday of this week, I think, when I had put out a tweet about the far right and about the people carrying out the violence. It would have been Wednesday when I did it. And this woman, I'll find it while I'm talking to you. This woman responded to me and said, honestly, Sheila, call yourself a journalist. You're completely missing the point. And I said, what is the point? And she put a picture up of the man who was arrested with a large knife near to the vigil on the night of the vigil. You'll know probably what I'm alluding to. Mm-hmm. And it was a man with dark hair and a dark beard. And she, along with lots of other people, had just leapt to the conclusion that there was a Muslim man with a knife around the area of the vigil, and that is what the people who kicked off were responding to. And because she said, we'll call yourself a journalist, and I said, she put this picture up of this man, and I said, and I never got a response from her. Here we go, I found it. She said, oh dear, Spirited One is her name on Instagram, on Twitter. Oh dear, Sheila, you're supposed to be a journalist. Look at the timeline of events before you comment, and what she puts up as a picture of this man. And I just wrote, and? Question mark. And obviously got no reply. It emerges yesterday that gentleman has, it's not his actual name, I can't remember his actual name now, but it's something like Dave Jones, do you know what I mean? He is, I don't know if he's converted to Islam in his life, I doubt it, but he's a Brit. Yeah. He's just a white British man with dark hair and a beard.
Yeah.
But she was absolutely convinced that the reason the violence happened was because a Muslim with a knife turned up.
No, not at all. And it's just such a shame that people would be so quick to jump and say that atrocities happen in every community.
And we need to be careful until we have the facts, don't we?
Absolutely.
Then we can react to the facts, and I don't mean with violence on the streets, but appropriately, just proportionately and carefully react to the facts. Thanks, BB, and I'm sorry you're exposed to that kind of abuse. Farhan has called from Walthamstow. Hello, Farhan.
Oh, salam, Sheila. Thanks for having a little Muslim hour. And one of my favourites.
A Muslim hour, is that what we're calling it?
Why not?
Kind of.
This is Juma Mubarak to you as well, which is sounds exciting. It's our holy day. Well, I want to basically just mention that, since what's happened in Southport, very predictable that the Muslim community would be sort of arbitrarily targeted in the vacuum of any idea about who the perpetrator is, or was, or is, sorry. And I expected it. I knew this would happen. It happened every single time there's some kind of, terrorist incident, things like that. And it's quite upsetting, I would say, as a Muslim, to kind of to be prejudged as being extreme or being all of these little things that a lot of people sort of seem to have in their head. And I exist between two different identities that seem to be contradictory. I'm gay, but I'm also Muslim, and I would say some people will say, well, you're not practicing Muslim, and try to add qualifiers onto it like that. But the fact of the matter is, I'm a Muslim, and I'm very much proud of being, that part of that faith identity, and I have a Muslim community around me that I'm really grateful for. Additionally, I have parents that are Muslim, and they live up in the north in Scotland, and they've got a very kind of, lovely Muslim community that I'm a part of, and I need to kind of like trust that my mum and dad, can feel safe in that community, because I live all the way down here in London. So it's a very tricky thing for me now. What I really wanted to talk about is the fact that a lot of these sort of right-wing people, they seize upon LGBT as a reason to suggest that Muslims cannot live in Britain, or Muslim, the faith of Islam, the Muslim community, there's a conflict with Western values, with being Muslim and Western values. Now listen, I'm not going to sit here and say it's all perfect, being gay, and that I'm fully accepted by my Muslim community. Of course.
Or even the whole British community. There are still plenty of homophobes in Britain.
Thank you. There is still a lot of work to be done, right? And the thing is, I'm actually more afraid of anti-Muslim racism than I am of the homophobia within my community. I walk around, I've got quite a sizable beard now, and I appear very Muslim and brown. I was subjected to quite a traumatic event back on Armistice Day in November last year by EDL. They come out to protect the cenotaph, yes. So I was kind of subjected to quite a scary, traumatic event, and it was just because of the way I looked. And this is what I really want to sort of talk about. There's a viral video going around right now of just this brown person walking down the streets in Hartlepool. And,
and he has to turn on his heels very quickly, doesn't he, and get to safety.
Well, he was, I think, quite bravely just walking down the street, thinking, well, I'm just walking down the street. A full punch to the face. Full punch, full force, just for being brown.
And if he'd stood still long enough, they'd have jumped in, several of them.
Right, so he just turned around calmly.
I
don't think enough people are commending his fortitude, actually.
No, you're absolutely right. And if people haven't seen it, it's quite easy to find on social media. It happened a couple of nights ago in Hartlepool. Farhan, thank you very much indeed for your call, Farhan, in Walthamstow. Lots of texts coming in as well. I'll read those in a second. But I'm just keen to hear about your mosque. We have the horrible events on Tuesday night in Southport, and the attack on the mosque included in those events. And we have planned protests at mosques for some reason by far-right groups and others over the weekend. So tell me about your mosque. Let's celebrate your mosque. It's 1:31. Let's get some headlines from Amelia Cox.
Anyone planning further violent protests in the wake of the Southport stabbings have been told authorities will be watching you. Speaking to LBC, Home Office Minister Lord Hanson says would-be rioters should be prepared to face the full force of the law. Evan Gershkovich has called the support for him overwhelming after he was released from Russia in a prisoner swap. The journalist had been detained in Russia since March last year on espionage charges. And Team GB has won its 8th gold medal, with Bryony Page winning the women's trampoline final at the Paris Olympics. Rowers Emily Craig and Imogen Grant also claimed victory in the women's lightweight double sculls final earlier. LBC weather, breezy with a band of rain moving into the north and west this afternoon. Sunnier in the south and east with some cloud. Late sunshine for Northern Ireland, a high of 28 degrees.
This is LBC.
It's a busy day in Admouth. The Admiral bumps into Joe Jenkins in the supermarket.
Is everything okay? Well, got up at 6 a.m, showered, fed the cat, fed the dog, fed the kids, did the school run, the vet when I went on a run, drive to work, charged my car and charged for lunch, searched for new cars, used cars and tried to sell the old car, popped out to the flat and had tea with the tenant, sorted out the leak and picked up leaks for dinner, and now I need to find insurance. And
Angela Karim,
Mascarini retired from the fight after 46 seconds, having taken a blow the like of which she said through tears she had never felt before. So far, so boxing. But Iman Khalif had been disqualified for failing to meet eligibility criteria the previous year. She was able to fight in the Olympics because the body that administered that test had been stripped of its competence by the International Olympic Committee, leaving the committee to declare her eligible to fight in the women's boxing on the basis of the gender in her passport. This afternoon, another boxer who was stripped of her eligibility at the same tournament, the World Championships, Lin Yuting of Taiwan, will fight too. Speaking to our colleagues on 5 Live this morning, Culture Secretary Lisa Nan was asked whether these decisions should be left to sporting bodies.
My position is not that it's just a matter for sporting bodies, and if they say it's fine, then it's fine. My position is that we need to support those sporting bodies to make the right decision, recognising that biology matters, and biology matters particularly when it comes to sports like boxing. As I understand it, in this particular case, the facts are more complicated than are being presented on social media, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be exposing those decisions to the oxygen of sunlight and making sure that we test those decisions so that we get those right.
Culture Secretary this morning. Well, our sports editor Dan Rowan joins us from Paris. Dan, the background to this is fairly complicated. In fact, different sporting organisations appear to have different criteria to allow people to participate, and this seems to have led to a fair amount of confusion.
That's right, yes. Apologies for the sound here. We're in the boxing arena and they're just preparing for fighting to begin. Right. But yes, you're right. This dispute between the IOC and the IBA lies very much at the heart of this. The International Boxing Association, as you said, disqualified these two fighters from last year's World Championships, saying that they'd failed unspecified eligibility tests, effectively a sex test, according to his chief executive when we spoke to him yesterday, although he wouldn't reveal precise details of it when we asked. The IBA, though, is suspended. It's not been recognised by the IOC over financial issues, and so the IOC is running the Olympic boxing programme itself, and crucially, they're applying different rules from the last Games in Tokyo, and they insist that these fighters have met those regulations, that they deserve to be here, and they also say the decision by the IBA to disqualify them last year from their competition was arbitrary and without due process. The IOC also says that it only uses the sex on a boxer's passport to determine eligibility, not gender tests or testosterone tests. Other sports bodies, they have different policies when it comes to eligibility for women's competition. World Athletics, for example, they're among those that apply a testosterone limit and asks competitors to take medication to lower it if it's deemed too high. Others say that if a competitor has gone through male puberty, they can't compete in the women's category. So different policies for different sports. I think some would like the IOC to provide more of a blanket approach, but they say that they're trying to balance inclusion with fairness and safety, and ultimately it has to be for individual sports to decide their policies.
Dan, when it comes to the Algerian boxer Iman Khalif, she has been fighting in women's boxing a fair while now, hasn't she? And it has been with mixed results.
Indeed, yes. Khalif's 25, but she's very experienced. She competed at the Tokyo Games 3 years ago, and she's had a 15-fight career. She's lost 9 times, in fact, during that time. This is one of the points that the IOC has made, which is that this is not a fight that suddenly appeared. For years, the IBA were very happy for her to compete. I asked the IBA yesterday what constitutes the timing. Why was it that only last year was Khalif deemed ineligible, and they said it was in response to concerns raised by fighters and coaches. But Khalif will fight again tomorrow after that bout yesterday when her Italian opponent abandoned the bout. Hungary's Anna Luca Hamori is the next opponent, and she says that she's not scared and she's backed herself to beat Khalif.
Dan, I think a fair number of people will be fairly confused that there can be so many different judgments of eligibility from different bodies, leading to this kind of confusion. Is it too much to ask for one criteria to be agreed upon across sport?
Well, I think the IOC's perspective, as I said a moment ago, is that would be too simplistic, and the characteristics of different sports are so different that, you know, with some involving physical contact, obviously like boxing, most obvious example, others perhaps like shooting and archery, the complete opposite end of the spectrum, that it would be amiss to apply a blanket policy when you're trying to balance fairness, inclusion, safety. It depends on which sport we're referring to, and we've seen in the last year or two different sports take different approaches. More and more of them are now applying a stricter approach, one would say, when it comes to eligibility. So we've seen this in athletics, cycling, swimming, for example, triathlon, but other sports may prefer to put more emphasis on inclusion. Others, however, as I say, would like the IOC to provide more leadership. And I think many feel that in taking the approach that they have, they're letting down athletes. They're allowing some to be exposed to what some believe is danger if they're fighting opponents who, because of testosterone levels, have more strength and muscle mass. And I think equally, there are some who believe that fighters like Khalif and Lin Yuting are being let down as well, given the global scrutiny now on them.
Dan, thank you very much indeed. Dan Rowan there, our sports editor in a fairly noisy boxing. It's not every day that sober-minded academics get very excited under archaeological finds, but then it's not every day that what lies beneath the earth in southwest Wales rewrites our understanding of the early history of these islands. That's just what the discovery of a Roman fort near Cardiff has done. Not just any fort, according to the man who found it, a humongous fort, an incredible find of national importance. His words. I spoke to the very excited Mark Moroni, a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries and at Oxford University's Wolfson College. Before we came on, he started with how he stumbled upon
The story begins just over 20 years ago. I found a Roman villa in West Wales, and somebody asked me a question, a very legitimate question. What is a Roman villa doing in the middle of nowhere? And then I realised there was a villa about 6 kilometres further east, and then a place name linking the two that suggested there was a Roman road. That began my research into looking at the Roman road network in that part of the world. In 2022, I found what I thought was almost certainly an ancient route across the Preseli Hills, and then subsequently that was confirmed by additional discoveries, and I linked it to Carmarthen. So in the process of doing this, I started to look at other areas, and I started to look sort of further to the northeast and the northwest. So really on the bounds of North Pembrokeshire into Carmarthenshire, and that's how I found it, because literally is on the road network. So I found a new old road, if you like.
So you're there, you find the road, and you think, well, all roads lead to something, and then you find the fort, and just the circumstances around the fort, and you trip over.
Yeah, I spotted it on satellites, Google Earth imagery, which most people tend to use. I saw what I thought appeared to be a fort, so that in itself could have or could not have been an identification of an ancient site. I was actually rather confident because it has certain characteristics like rounded corners, which led me to believe that it was a Roman fort.
And forgive me, I know that the exact location of the fort is being kept secret to stop people falling over it with metal detectors and trowels, but you have uncovered the fort, or you now have a clear idea of what the fort looks like?
Yes, I've done some field walking and I've found some diagnostic material. That's the crucial thing.
So what's that?
Any Roman building, just like today, will have to have roofing tiles, and Roman tiles tend to have a distinctive form, and they tend to take the form of hexagonal, usually with a very diagonal pattern.
is 5. This is Johnny Bennett, and that's the world.
This is BBC Radio 4. Becky Ripley and Emily Knight. Underground in this week's election.
Sounds fun from the outside, but really, otherwise it's just pretending to be watching. Then in walks an underground composer. It's quite homely, but with an underground party. And suddenly, a vibe picks up. Conversation starts to flow, dancing starts to grow. What's going on? Well, turns out, an underground composer network is a fun one. Hello, and welcome to Nature Bound. I'm Becky Ripley, and I'm Emily Knight. And in this series from BBC Radio 4, we look to the natural world to learn more about the home. And today, we're inviting this underground mycorrhizal fungi to our pot and Black Party Women program. And like all good parties, it's going to end up at 3 a.m. with a detailed explanation of marketing content.
My name is Bethan. I'm a fungal biologist specialising in mycorrhizal fungi.
This is Dr. Bethan Manley.
And I work for SPUN, which stands for the Society for Protecting Underground Networks.
SPUN are on a mission to learn more about many different species of mycorrhizal fungi that live below ground. They work with scientists across the continents to sample the soil in almost every corner of the world.
Lots of work on the project for the mycorrhizal. A lot of work done in Colombia, Ecuador, Ghana, Gambia.
And Bethan went on her own field trip last year to the steppes of Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan has these really enormous steppe ecosystems. And what we were doing there was collecting soil samples to identify which mycorrhizal fungi live in this steppe ecosystem and help the plants survive the harsh conditions there.
It was a trip of extremes. Extreme heat.
There was actually a heat wave, and it was 38 degrees.
Extreme isolation.
Hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of grassland. We camped near these abandoned Soviet farms.
Extreme beauty.
There's these incredible flower meadows, really big sunsets,
and extreme levels of pH.
I've never seen so many mosquitoes in my life.
What they call them in native science.
What we then do with those samples is we sequence them and identify which mycorrhizal fungi were present in the steppe.
So, what's all this for? Why are these fungal networks so important? Well, it's all going on underground, but they are crucial to the survival of almost all terrestrial plants and trees across the world, forming a symbiotic relationship with roots based around the trading of resources.
Fungi can't make their own food, which means that they're reliant on plants to provide them sugars and fats, and in exchange, the mycorrhizal fungi forage in the soil for nutrients to provide for the plants. This really works particularly well because the fungal networks are actually more efficient at foraging in the soil than plant roots themselves are. And this is because they're mycelium. This is another word for networks. Their networks are very, very fine and they're very efficient at taking up soil nutrients.
So, the mycorrhizal fungi uses its extensive network of long, thin fibrils to forage for mineral nutrients in the soil, which it then gives to the plant so it can sustain itself. And in return, the plant takes carbon dioxide from photosynthesis, turns it into sugars and fats, and gives it to the fungi in CO2 and sustains itself. Nutrients are traded for carbon, carbon is traded for nutrients. It's doing business.
For a sense of scale, how many plants across the world roughly depend on kind of make use of these fungal networks to get the nutrients that they need?
It's an immensely widespread symbiosis, and 80% of the terrestrial plant species in the world form this relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. So really it's the vast majority of plants that you would see in any ecosystem that will be engaging in this partnership, which of course makes these fungi absolutely crucial to ecosystems.
And what nutrients are they harvesting for the plants mostly?
So mostly this will be phosphorus and nitrogen, but mycorrhizal fungi are also responsible for providing water for plants.
Which was definitely the case on the steppes of Kazakhstan.
With increasing desertification, which is really spreading over that region of the world, this is something we're really interested to find out exactly which species are, say, particularly talented at living through droughts and helping their plant partners live through them too.
And what's amazing about these partnerships is how old they are. These relationships have really stood the test of time.
The symbiotic relationship between mycorrhizal fungi and plants and the roughly 400 million years ago. So it's really, really ancient. And we know all of this because there's actually fossil evidence dated to be around 400 million years old. And the leading hypothesis right now is that these fungi are actually what enabled early plants, which were aquatic just like early animals, to move on to land and become land plants, because these early plants barely had root systems, and the mycorrhizal fungi actually acted as an immediate root system for these plants and let them take nutrients from the soil, which is much harder than taking nutrients from water.
Wow, I didn't know that. So they're crucial in a huge sort of evolutionary step of getting plants from the seed to the lab.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our own market economy, which moves and shakes to the very same economic principles fundamentally founded on the ideas of economist Adam Smith in the mid-1700s.
Yeah, so this goes all the way back to Adam Smith.
This is Ted Lufthansa-Leaders, professor in sustainable development at the Department of Economics at Rice University.
Who argued that instead of individuals trying to produce everything that they need on their own, since all of us are better in doing some things and maybe not as good at doing other things, it makes more sense to rather specialize in producing what we're good at and then trade that for the things that we really want to consume. So there's a market that might develop in order to accomplish this, and that's the basis of markets, prices, and economics.
And within this network of trade, the cost of everything is constantly in flux, in line with supply and demand.
There's supply, there's corresponding demand, and if demand exceeds supply, typically what we will see is prices rising for that good. If supply exceeds demand, what we'll see is typically prices declining. And of course, in the short term, there can be some imbalances. In fact, there can be some strong imbalances as well. But in the long run, there's an equilibrated process that leads towards the quality of supply and demand.
Over time, everything within the market is trying to reach this point of competitive equilibrium. In other words, supply equals demand. Or at least that's the ideal. But of course, in reality, it's almost impossible.
This is almost like a moving target, because you never reach the actual equilibrium, you're just chasing it.
So, economy lesson back to fungi versus plant trade.
Indeed, to an economist, this looks very much like a market where there is supply and demand for nutrients versus carbon, and the corresponding exchange rate, what an economist would call a price, between the two.
And what's bonkers is that despite not even having brains, these guys also seem to be working towards a competitive equilibrium.
They behave as equilibrium theory would have them behave. They maximize what they receive in this trade, given what they have, what they can supply. So they act as the rational Homo economicus would. So if I look at the trading data itself and ask, where is that coming from? I could not tell that it's not coming from human traders, because it contains the same type of sophistication without actually having consciousness behind it. Now, there's also a controversial thing about, to what extent plants and even fungi might have a level of consciousness, but we're not going to get into that.
There's a whole different can of worms. Well, underground mycorrhizal network of worms. Either way, consciousness. When it comes to market trading, mycorrhizal fungi have got it done.
They are incredibly shrewd and effective traders.
Do you think they're more shrewd than us humans?
I would say they are as shrewd, and for good reason, that both of us have evolved to be opportunistic where it suits our needs and symbiotic when it doesn't.
So it's clear that this trading partnership has evolved to function amazingly well for both trading partners, the plants and the fungi. But as with our own market trading in the human world, sometimes one side takes more than it gives. Back to Bethel.
Each partner, plant and fungus, they seem to be trying to get the most out of the other partner that they can and increase the benefit to themselves from the symbiosis.
Turns out these below ground deals are really not so far from our own above ground deals, where ultimately each trading partner is trying to achieve the best rate of exchange.
It does seem to be following this sort of supply and demand system, And there's even now evidence that mycorrhizal fungi are able to store nutrients when there is a surplus. So the plant starts to run out, and the fungi are able to, I guess, exploit that by holding some nutrients back and controlling how much the plant can take.
Which begs the question, is there a way that the fungi can potentially exploit the plants even more for the greater good in order to capture more carbon in the face of the planet?
If we could make nutrients relatively more expensive with respect to carbon, then the plant would need to provide more carbon to the fungi in order to receive nutrients. If we could somehow increase those amounts, it could make a big difference.
But in reality, it's not that simple.
You know, there are other entities involved, for example, bacteria. When you mess with these things, it's hard to predict which way it's going to come out.
Back to Betty.
It's just infinitely complex. You know, there are multiple plant species and multiple fungal species engaging in symbiosis and trading at the same time. They have to cope with constant environmental change.
And even if it did well, exploiting your trading partner, that might result in a short-term gain. But if you're relying on the other side for the things that you need, it's never going to work in the long run. These trade deals are only going to work if both sides of the partnership are able to survive and thrive.
It's such a delicate balance in the first place, and obviously we also really care about trees and plants, right? Because they're also carbon stocks.
Yeah, that's part of the deal.
That's part of the deal too. We want plants to be nourished with nutrients. We want mycorrhizal fungi to be keeping carbon in the ground by having these extensive networks. So, yeah, I actually don't think we need to be tweaking the symbiosis at all. Last year, researchers published this estimate that mycorrhizal fungi receive 13 billion tons of carbon annually from plants, which is the equivalent of around a third of our yearly fossil fuel emissions. So mycorrhizal fungi and their networks are already acting as this colossal carbon store without us even interfering. And our best way of ensuring that this continues is just reducing the destruction of the mycorrhizal networks and the habitats where they and their plant partners live.
So these highly evolved, beautifully complex below-ground economies don't need us to come along and rock the boat. They've done what they do for 400 million odd years, and boy do they do it well.
Really, the best way we can help their market economy to thrive, and thus to lock away carbon in the soil, is to provide the best conditions for them to continue trading in symbiosis, just as they've done since the dawn of terrestrial plants.
And seeing as they're so good at what they do,